The agronomist drove the shovel into the ground and stopped, not because he was tired, because he had never seen soil like this before. He bent down, lifted a dark, dense block of earth, and turned it over in his hands. It didn't crumble. It held together, soft, structured, alive. He broke it apart slowly, and that's when he saw them. One earthworm, then another, then another. He started counting. 10, 15, 20. He stopped, shook his head slightly, and started over. 30, 40. He lost count. In 22 years of testing soil across Indiana, he had never seen anything like it. Not in a lab, not in a textbook, and never on land that had been farmed continuously for nearly a century. "Who manages this ground?" he asked. The farmer standing behind him answered simply, "I do." The agronomist nodded once, still holding the soil. "What are you putting on it?" "Nothing. A beet. 15 years. I haven't put anything on it." The agronomist looked down at the soil again, then back at the farmer, then down again. He didn't speak. Not for a while. Because nothing about that answer made sense, according to everything he had been taught. 15 years earlier, a different man had stood in this same field. Clean shirt, company truck, briefcase full of data sheets. And he had said something with absolute certainty. If you stop spraying, your soil will be dead in 3 seasons. The soil wasn't dead. It was the most alive ground in the entire county. And the story of how it got that way started with a decision that looked like a mistake to everyone who saw it. March 1994. Daniel Brooks sat at his kitchen table, across from a man who had been part of his farm for nearly a decade. Richard Hale, regional sales manager, chemical supplier, a man who had built his career on helping farmers grow more. He set his coffee down, opened his briefcase, started talking about the season ahead. Inputs, programs, numbers. The same conversation they had every year. The same assumption, that it would continue. Daniel listened, didn't interrupt, didn't argue. Then, when the man across from him finished, he said 4 words. "I'm done spraying." Silence. Richard blinked. "Excuse me? I'm not ordering chemicals this year. No herbicides. No pesticides. No synthetic fertilizer." Richard leaned back slightly, trying to process what he had just heard. That's not how this works. You can't farm like that. Not anymore." Daniel didn't raise his voice. Didn't try to convince him. "I'm going to try." Richard shook his head slowly. "Been doing this for 18 years. I've seen 2 farmers try what you're talking about. Both of them came back. One of them lost half his fields to weeds. The other couldn't grow anything worth harvesting." He leaned forward, voice lower now, more serious. "If you stop spraying, your yields will collapse. Your soil won't know how to function, and you will lose this farm." Daniel looked at him, steady, unmoved. "I might lose it if I keep going the way I am." Richard frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm spending $40,000 a year before I grow a single bushel." Silence again. "One bad year," Daniel continued. "Drought, prices drop, storm at the wrong time. That 40,000 doesn't disappear. It stays. And that's what takes the farm." Richard didn't answer right away, because he knew that part was true. But truth doesn't always change belief. "This is a mistake," he said finally. "The biggest one you've ever made." Daniel nodded once. Maybe it was.
Or maybe it was the first time he had stopped doing something, just because everyone else was doing it. And what happened next was going to prove which one it really was. The decision didn't feel bold the next morning. It didn't feel brave. It felt quiet and heavy, because saying the words was one thing. Living with them was something else entirely. Daniel woke up before sunrise, same as always, walked out into the yard, cold air, still ground, a farm that looked exactly the same, even though everything had just changed. 280 acres, corn, soybeans, and not a single chemical order placed for the first time in decades. No safety net. 3 weeks earlier, he hadn't been thinking about quitting anything. He had been sitting at that same kitchen table, going through numbers. $40,000. That was the number that kept showing up. Herbicides, fertilizer, pesticides, more than fuel, more than repairs, more than anything else combined. It didn't make sense. Not anymore. But no one questioned it. Everyone paid it. Everyone assumed it was necessary. Until one night, his grandmother said something that didn't fit that assumption. Dorothy Brooks was 83. She had lived on that land longer than Daniel had been alive. Worked it, watched it, remembered it, from before it changed. Daniel showed her the numbers, didn't say anything at first, just turned the ledger toward her. She studied it quietly, then looked up. Your grandfather never spent $1 like this. Daniel frowned slightly. He didn't use chemicals? Not once. Then how did he grow anything? She leaned back in her chair, hands folded, eyes distant, like she was looking at something far behind the present. He fed the soil. Clover, rye, vetch. He planted it after harvest, turned it under in the spring. The soil fed the crop, and the crop fed him. Daniel looked back down at the numbers, then up again. His yields couldn't have been like this. They weren't. She said it simply. But his costs weren't either. That landed differently. Because for the first time, Daniel wasn't thinking about yield. He was thinking about what was left, after everything was paid. Later that night, he went up into the attic, dug through boxes that hadn't been opened in years, and found something no one else had bothered to read. His grandfather's records. Page after page. Year after year. Yields. Costs. Notes written in careful handwriting. Daniel sat on the floor under a single light, and started doing the math. His grandfather's average corn yield, just under 100 bushels per acre. His father's, closer to 150. At first glance, it looked obvious. More yield. Better system. That's what everyone believed. Looked at the costs. $12 per acre. That's what his grandfather had spent. $135. That's what his father had spent. Daniel stopped writing. Looked at the numbers again. Then again. Because something didn't line up. The difference wasn't what he expected. When he calculated net profit, the gap nearly disappeared. His grandfather, keeping almost as much per acre, with almost nothing spent. His father, producing more, but spending nearly everything to get there. Working harder, for less difference than anyone realized. Daniel closed the ledger slowly, sat there in silence. Because for the first time, he wasn't looking at farming the way he had been taught. He was looking at it the way it actually worked. Not yield, not output. What's left, when the season is over. The next morning, he made the decision. Not because he was certain, not because he knew it would work, but because the numbers told him, the current system didn't. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's what made the decision real. Not the conversation with Richard. Not the argument. The numbers. The quiet realization. that everyone around him was chasing something that didn't actually matter as much as they thought. And now, he was about to find out what happened when you stopped chasing it.
The first year looked like failure. Not subtle. Not something you had to explain. You could see it from the road. Where his neighbors' fields were clean, straight rows, uniform color. Daniel's fields looked uneven, rough, uncontrolled. The cover crop had done its job, partly. A thick mat of rye and clover lay across the soil, protecting it, holding moisture. But in places, weeds pushed through, thin at first, then thicker. His corn came in lower, not disastrous, but enough to be noticed. Just under 100 bushels, down from 145 the year before. At the elevator, nobody said anything directly, not to his face, but he heard it. Everyone hears it. Looks like he tried something new. Looks like it didn't work. A pause. A small laugh. He'll be back next year. Daniel didn't argue. Didn't defend it. Because there was nothing to defend yet. They weren't wrong. The second year was worse. The soil was changing. But not fast enough. Not in a way anyone else could see. Yields dropped again. Corn down into the 80s. Soybeans lower than he'd ever seen. From the road, it looked like proof. Proof that he had made a mistake. His neighbor to the south pulled up beside him one afternoon. Truck idling. Window down. "You planning on fixing this?" Daniel turned. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." A gesture toward the field. Weeds everywhere. Crops uneven. "That's not how this ground used to look." Daniel nodded once. "I know." The man leaned on the door. More serious now. "Your dad kept this place tight. Clean. Productive. This." A pause. "This isn't that." Daniel didn't respond right away. Because he understood what the man was really saying. "You're ruining what was built before you. It's not going to look good for a while." Daniel said finally. "That's not how farming works." "It might be." The man shook his head. Started to pull away. "You're going to lose this place if you keep this up." The truck drove off. Dust settling slowly behind it. And for a moment, Daniel wondered if he was right. Because doubt doesn't come all at once. It shows up in small pieces. Late at night. Early in the morning. When the field doesn't look the way it used to. When the numbers don't match what everyone else is getting. When everything you're doing looks like it's failing. But Daniel wasn't just looking at the crop. He was looking at the soil. Every week, he walked the same rows. Stopped in the same places. Dug into the ground. Obvious. Not yet. But it was there. The soil was softer. Easier to push into. Less resistance. Where it had once felt tight, compacted, like something that had been pressed down over time, it was starting to open. Just slightly. He noticed more life. Not a lot. Not like the agronomist would see years later. But more than before. Earthworms. Small ones. Scattered. The cover crop roots were breaking through layers that hadn't been touched in years. Pulling something up from deeper down. And the surface was different. Protected. Shaded. Holding moisture longer after rain. Even when the crop above it struggled. At the co-op, they didn't talk about that. They talked about yield. Always yield. Because yield is visible. What's happening underneath isn't. Daniel kept going. Not because he was confident, but because he had already gone too far to turn back. Because if he stopped now, he wouldn't know if it could have worked. And that question would follow him longer than the failure ever would. So he planted again. Same system. Same approach. And waited. Because what he was trying to build wasn't something you could measure in a single season. Or even two. It was something slower.
something deeper. And whether it would work or not, was about to become impossible to ignore. By the third year, something started to shift. Not in a way anyone at the co-op would notice. Not from the road, not in the yield reports, but in the ground. Daniel pushed the shovel in one morning, and it went deeper than it used to. No resistance, no hard layer stopping it halfway down. He pulled up a section of soil and held it. It felt different. Still dark, still heavy, but not tight anymore. Not compacted. It broke apart in his hands, slowly, naturally, like it wanted to. That hadn't happened before. The crops began to respond, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. Corn climbed back over 100 bushels. Soybeans followed, still below the county average, still not impressive to anyone measuring success the old way, but no longer falling. And something else stayed the same. His costs. While other farmers were writing checks for $45,000, Daniel was spending just over $4. Seeds, fuel, a few parts. That was it. Same acres, same land. Completely different system. At the diner, nobody talked about that. They talked about yields. Always yields. Because yields are easy to compare. But Daniel was watching something else. What was left, after everything was paid? And for the first time, the numbers were starting to turn. His yields were rising. Their costs were rising faster. The gap was closing. By year 5, it wasn't subtle anymore. Corn reached 120, soybeans into the 40s. Still slightly behind the highest chemical yields, but close enough. And his costs had barely moved. That's when the math stopped making sense to everyone else. Because now, he wasn't just surviving. He was keeping more. Across the fence line, the difference was starting to show in a different way. Not in the crop, in the soil, in the problems. Weeds began to change. Not fewer, different, harder. The same herbicides that had worked for years stopped working as well. Farmers added new ones, stronger ones, more expensive ones, trying to stay ahead of something they had helped create. Daniel's fields didn't follow that pattern. The thick cover crop mats suppressed most of the weeds. The rest, he dealt with mechanically. Not perfect, but stable. And year after year, the pressure didn't increase. By year 8, everything changed. Not slowly, not quietly. All at once. Corn hit 138 bushels, 7 below the county average. But close enough that it didn't matter. Soybeans matched. From the road, you couldn't tell the difference anymore. Not in the crop. But the numbers told a completely different story. County average chemical cost, $48,000. Daniel's cost, under 5. Same acres, same crop. Almost the same yield. Completely different outcome. For the first time, Daniel Brooks was making more money per acre than anyone in the county. Not because he was producing more, because he was spending almost nothing. At the co-op, the conversations changed. Not openly, not directly, but you could hear it. That Brooks field doesn't look bad. A pause for what he's doing. No one laughed. Not anymore. The system they had trusted for years was starting to show cracks. And the thing they had dismissed was starting to work. Daniel didn't say anything, didn't explain it, didn't try to convince anyone. Because he understood something they didn't yet. What he was building wasn't just a better crop. It was a system that didn't depend on anything outside the farm. And systems like that don't fail the same way. When things get hard, and something hard was coming. The kind of season that would prove everything. Not with numbers, with survival. The drought didn't announce itself. It never does. There was no single day, no moment where anyone could point and say, this is when it started. Just less rain. Week after week, clouds that formed, then disappeared, fields that waited, and didn't get what they needed. By June, the soil had already begun to give up. By July, it was clear. This wasn't a dry spell. This was the kind of season that exposes everything. Every weakness, every shortcut, every decision made years ago that nobody thought would matter anymore. Across the county, the fields started to change. Corn leaves curled tight, color faded, growth slowed, then stopped. The soil told the story first. Hard, cracked, dry beneath the surface. Water didn't soak in anymore. It ran off, or disappeared, like it had somewhere better to go. Roots couldn't go deeper. They hit resistance. A hard layer, built over years. The plants had nowhere to reach. By August, it was visible from every road. Fields that should have been tall, stood stunted, uneven, failing. At the elevator, no one needed to ask. Everyone knew this was going to hurt. Daniel drove past those same fields, day after day, and then he drove into his own, and stopped, because it didn't look the same, not even close. The corn was still standing, tall, green, leaves open, not perfect, not untouched, but alive. He walked into the rows. The ground beneath his boots was cool, still holding moisture, still working. He dug down, 30 inches, no resistance, no hard layer. The roots had gone deeper than they ever had before, reaching water no one else could get to. And the surface was covered. A layer of residue, from years of cover crops, protecting everything underneath. Across the fence line, it was different. The same soil, the same rain, the same year, different system. Where his neighbor's ground had baked, his had held. Where theirs had dried out, his had stayed alive. Harvest came early for most. There wasn't much to wait for. The crop had already given what it could. Yields dropped, hard, from 150 down into the 90s. Some lower, some didn't cover costs at all. $40,000 in inputs for a crop that barely paid it back, or didn't. Daniel's fields came off later, like they always did. The numbers came in, 131 bushels. Not the highest he'd ever had, but in that year, it was everything. Because his costs hadn't changed. Still under 5,000. Same system, same inputs. Different outcome. While others were calculating losses, taking loans, trying to figure out how to recover, Daniel was looking at the same thing he had been watching for years. The soil, and what it had become. The county noticed, not all at once, not loudly. But no one could ignore it anymore. A man named Dr. Alan Mercer came out the following spring. County agronomist, 20 years of experience. He had heard the stories, didn't believe them, until he saw it himself. He drove the shovel in, pulled up the soil, and stopped. Exactly the way the story began. He broke it apart, started counting, stopped, started again. Then looked up. I've never seen ground like this. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Your structure, your biology. The man shook his head slightly. This is what soil is supposed to look like. A pause, then, and you're farming it. Daniel nodded. The soil knows what to do. I just stopped getting in its way. That line spread, not like a headline, like a realization. Farmers started coming by, one at a time. Walking the field, digging the soil. Looking at something they hadn't seen in years. Or ever. The conversation changed. Not about chemicals, not about programs, about soil. About what it was supposed to be. Years later, Daniel still farms that same ground. Same system, same approach. No chemicals. His son works beside him now, learning the same thing, a different way. Not from a salesman, not from a brochure. From the land. The ledger still sits on the kitchen table. Old numbers, simple math. Proof that was there all along. Because this story was never about rejecting something new. It was about remembering something old. That the soil is alive. And if you feed it, it feeds you. If you poison it, it dies slowly. And takes everything with it. For years, they said he was killing his land. Said his yields would collapse, said he would lose the farm. They were right about one thing. Something did collapse. Just not what they expected. The system he walked away from needed everything to survive. The system he built needed almost nothing. And when the drought came, only one of them kept working. The soil didn't die. It came back to life. Stronger than anyone had ever seen. And it had been waiting the whole time. For someone to stop getting in its way.